Hi everybody, my name's Will Amadon from Middlebury College, and today I'm going to talk about work we've been doing for about the last 4 years, looking at patterns and causes of post-rift rejuvenation of the northeastern U.S. I just want to thank all the students and colleagues who've been involved, especially Andrew Kylander-Clark, who has been leading the way on the uranium-lead dating of calcite. So I also want to dedicate this talk to Mary Roden Tice, who was a co-PI on the original work. So we'll start out with some evidence for rejuvenation in the eastern U.S. I'll briefly tell you about some thermochronology we've done, and then the rest about uranium-lead dating of faults and fractures. So we know there's been periods of tectonic uplift and exhumation in New England since rifting. The main reason is we see a locus of very young fission-track ages in northern New England, suggesting these areas have experienced 1 to 3 kilometers more exhumation than other parts of the Northeast, probably via differential tectonics. Likewise, if we look in the Baltimore Canyon Trough, the repository of eroded sediments, we see 3 pulses of sediment, an early Cretaceous, a late Cretaceous, and a Miopliocene, suggesting episodes of accelerated erosion onshore. Keep these in mind. These are going to be a framework for the talk. Early Cretaceous, late Cretaceous, and Miopliocene. Also, we have widespread volcanism in the New England Quebec province, all the way up to as young as 97 million years. Okay, so we know we've had some combination of tectonic uplift, thermally driven uplift, volcanism, erosion. Let's look at some thermochronology now to think about the timing of that. So we've worked at 5 different sites using a combination of surface samples and deep drill cores. Right now I'm just going to tell you about Maine, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. And I'm not even going to show you the data, I'm just going to show you the summary here. Essentially at those sites, surface samples, this is apatite helium and apatite fission-track, coast of Maine. We see accelerated cooling from about 130 to 100, so kind of in the early to mid-Cretaceous slot. In Connecticut, on the flank of the Hartford Graben, the Moodus core yields a period of rapid cooling from about 125 to 110 million, again from combined apatite helium, apatite fission-track. And published in 2016, the Redstone core near Conway, New Hampshire, also apatite, helium, and fission-track, yields a pulse of cooling in the late Cretaceous, about 85 to 65 million. So one important detail here is that we only see this pulse of late Cretaceous cooling in New Hampshire at the moment. We did not see it in Maine or in Connecticut. And so what does that tell us? Well, it's interesting. I was worried about it at first, and then the more I thought about it, I thought, you know what, we knew this already by looking at Mary Roden Tice's fission-track ages. We knew that there was quite a bit more, presumably later exhumation in the northern New England and the White Mountains, and also here in the southern Champlain Valley. And now we know that that is focused in the late Cretaceous from about 85 to 65, but that event was not apparently experienced down in Connecticut or measurable in Maine here. Okay, so that's what we know from the thermochronology. Let's look now at what we can learn from uranium-lead dating of calcite in faults and fractures. So the way this works is we went around the Champlain Valley sampling calcite veins, either from kind of dilational fractures like these, or from actual fault zones where you have calcite mineralization in the fault zone, often with silicon fibers. The benefit of this is that these calcite is really only deposited at shallow crustal depths, and it can be very sensitive to young tectonic events, maybe events that didn't even cause exhumation, and events that are not recorded in apatite fission-track or apatite helium cooling. So we collected 600 samples, mostly from the Champlain Valley, the sedimentary rocks of the Champlain Valley here. And here's our compilation. And right away, so this is time on the X. We have ages from about 130 million right up to about 3 million. And to me, this reads like a timeline of tectonism, right? Basically, nothing happened since the Paleozoic for hundreds of millions of years in the Champlain Valley. All of a sudden, about 130, we start to pick up some faulting. And that faulting and fracturing is then semi-continuous for, about 50 million years, which is fascinating. And then it turns off. And except for a few isolated events, we have nothing for 65 million years, and it then turns on again in the Miopliocene, perhaps associated with the rise of modern topography in New England. So we see New England, and we see the Champlain Valley wake up about 10 million years ago. So based on field observations, we can bin these into three main categories. This mid-Cretaceous group is mostly Mode 1. These are vertical dilational fractures formed under very low normal stress, often apparently with high fluid pressure. Then that gives way to a late Cretaceous period, which is almost entirely calcite within extensional faults, mostly recording east-west extensional faulting. And then the Miopliocene samples also are almost exclusively associated with minor extensional faults. So we have these kind of different categories, and really this mid-Cretaceous period is not mostly faulting, it's mostly dilational fracturing. And here's what I mean by that. Here's some examples of some Mode 1 fractures, okay, these vertical sets. Here's a nice fault zone from Vergennes, Vermont. East-west extension, this is the hanging wall. This is really well dated. We've got 5 samples from this, all Cretaceous, about 85 million. And then here's an example of the Miopliocene east-west extension. So here we have a very high angle extensional fault that is cross-cutting everything else and just leading to just minor offsets. You can see a minor offset right here. And this is very typical of the Miopliocene. Minor offsets on high angle structures, all with mostly east-west extensions. Actually, since I'm on that, I'll just show you. Here's the compilation of inferred sigma-3 stress for that Miopliocene faulting, okay? And you can see it's almost entirely east-west, very, very shallow angle of the sigma-3 there. And then likewise, the inferred sigma-3 stresses for the mid-Cretaceous and late Cretaceous faults are almost entirely east-northeast, west-southwest. So we're seeing everything, all these sigma-3 stresses kind of going this way. And I'll just say a lot of this points basically the east-west extension. And first I'm like, well, why do we only measure east-west extension at any time period? But if you think about it, it makes sense, right? All the structures are oriented north-south, and really and we're often reactivating existing structures. And the only time you can put calcite into a fault zone is if you have some dilational space created, right? So you have extension, you create space, fluids flow in, and you put calcite into the fault zone or the fracture. And so if you think about our methods here, they're heavily biased towards documenting periods of east-west extension. Great, and so I also want to quickly just compare this with the timing of volcanism. How does this faulting that we're documenting compare with volcanism, right? And so I put together this compilation. We see kimberlite volcanism kicking off in the west about 147 to 140. And then we see basically volcanism sweeping westward over the next 30 million years. So here it is at 130 million. Here it is at 120 million. This is the main phase of Plutonism. And then it protrudes all the way into eastern Maine. And then what's cool is it collapses back mostly towards the southern Champlain Valley. So the last gasp of volcanism really is in the southern Champlain Valley, really at coeval with this Mode 1 fracturing that we're dating in the Champlain Valley. Quick look at stable isotopes here. Sorry for more data. There's a lot of data. The main take-home point is just it looks like almost all of these veins and the calcite, whether in a vein or whether in a fault, is derived mostly from local host rocks. Here's the range of our host rock values, and here's our oxygen isotopes of our veins. Again, for carbon, here's the host rock range, and that's pretty darn close to what we see for the veins themselves. We do see one interesting thing. If you look at the offset between the host and the vein for oxygen isotopes, so the difference between the host and the vein, which are paired, we see a good bit of scatter for the Mode 1 event and for the late Cretaceous faulting, maybe due to meteoric fluids or temperature fractionation that could be pulling them apart. But for the Miocene faulting, they are so tightly clustered. So there's almost no offset between the oxygen isotope value of the vein and the host rock. And to me, this suggests either there was not meteoric fluid contamination or this was happening cold and we didn't have a lot of temperature-driven fractionation, maybe consistent with really shallow faulting. So to bring this all together, it's been a lot, I'm sorry. We can look at this timeline. This is kind of what we know now. We've got our 3 pulses of sediment: early Cretaceous, mid-Cretaceous, and Miocene. Overlapped with that, we can see that this first one, the early Cretaceous, almost certainly is associated with widespread volcanism and probably thermal disturbance, possibly uplift throughout New England, right? We have kimberlite volcanism. We have widespread NEQ volcanism. We have moderate amounts of cooling in Connecticut and Maine. All of this consistent with perhaps volcanism-driven regional uplift, right? We have our period of Mode 1 fracturing during that late stage of volcanism in the Champlain Valley. Things settle for a minute, and then we have our late Cretaceous episode. This is not associated with volcanism, right? But we see cooling in central New Hampshire, the White Mountains. We see really intense east-west extension on structures in the Champlain Valley. Then things cool down for a while. And then Miocene, we see that last episode of high-angle east-west extension in the Champlain Valley. And, geomorphic models suggest that topographic relief in the region probably is less than 20 million years old. So we're getting a nice, coherent story here, although we still don't understand everything. I'm going to leave you with these grand conclusions, and hopefully I'm under 12 minutes.